Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name is Jason Jones, joined by James Copley and Phil Smith. As always, plenty to be discussing on this Monday morning. We're going to be taking a broader look at Sunderland's impressive start to the Premier League season as a whole. But first, Phil, there is the small matter of Saturday's defeat against Manchester United to quickly take a look at. Obviously, a pretty disappointing result given Sunderland's recent form and Manchester United's recent form as well, it has to be said. But just interested to hear what you made of the performance at Old Trafford over the weekend.
Yeah, it was a disappointing day. It's probably one of the few days where you've come away from the game feeling a little bit flat so far this season. Nice to be back doing the Raw. We should first congratulate Mr. Copley on the arrival of a new Sunderland fan. So congratulations, James. We've had a few people asking about the Raw. We've had a lot going on at the Echo, but we're back. Normal service is very much resumed from today. So it feels fitting that we've come back after a 2-0 defeat. It's kind of normal, comfortable areas for us all to be operating in, isn't it? It was a strange kind of game because I couldn't quite work out whether it was by accident or by design, but it felt like Sunderland were a little bit more attacking, a little more aggressive than they had been in their previous away games, and couldn't quite work out if that was Man United had kind of invited them onto them a little bit, whether Sunderland had maybe got a little bit carried away because of the form. But either way, I guess it was a little bit of a bump down to earth because, people can talk about Man United's form and the struggles they're having, but with Ahmad and Casemiro back in the side, they had a very strong team and they were just a little bit too quick, a bit too sharp for Sunderland. Particularly that combination of Ahmad and Mbeumo, that was comfortably the best sort of individual display. I know I'm talking about two players that I've seen this season, and it took Sunderland just a long time to get to grips with that, really. And whether that's Sunderland just dipping a little bit below the levels that we've seen from the season, I'm not sure. So maybe just a little bit of a reality check and a reminder that, Sunderland have to get back to the basics of what they've done really well this season, and that regardless of how well they've done, they aren't a team that can afford to not be at their best. If they're not at their best, they're going to lose games. I think that was probably the key takeaway from it.
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it, James? Obviously, Régis took the decision to make a couple of changes heading into the game in wide areas. We saw Enzo Lafay move into the centre of the park as well. I mean, just sort of interested to get your thoughts on that, because certainly looking on from a distance, it wasn't something that I was necessarily expecting. It felt like quite a big call, and it felt like it might have had a bit of a bearing on how some of them were able to go about their business.
I think I can see what Le Bris was trying to do. I think transitions have been particularly big in the Premier League and in all of Sunderland's games this season, and I feel like Le Bris was sort of setting up to hit Manchester United on the counter-attack using transitions. I think that's probably why I went with the Dinger and Traore in the wide areas. Did it work? No. I think he probably got his team selection and his tactics wrong. Easy for me to say in hindsight, though, isn't it? I don't think many people were sort of saying this is a clanger of a team before the game. Ironically, it suited Manchester United's system, which has come in for so much stick this season that we're able to double up on Sunderland's left-hand side, as Phil mentions, with Amad Diallo and Bryan Mbeumo. And I think it gets a little bit lost about Manchester United, doesn't it, given the real poor form and the sort of slow decay of the club. But they have actually got some really, really good players. Yes, it's not working at the moment, but Mason Mount is a top-level Premier League operator. Bryan Mbeumo went for a lot of money. We know how good Amad Diallo is. So I think it was frustrating in a sense that had Le Bris gone with a 5 at the back from the start, I could see a scenario in which Sunderland maybe had got a point or grown into the game a bit quicker. But yeah, disappointing. But I don't think there's any need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The quality in the Premier League is incredible. We've still had an excellent start of the season. And in terms of Le Bris sort of getting it wrong, quote unquote, he's got a lot of credit in the bank. I think he sort of recognised his mistake, didn't he? And that was pleasing, although Sunderland were 2-0 down at the time. So I think there's lots to ponder. And going forward, perhaps shows a little bit of a blueprint, really, if you are playing quality opposition away from home, quote unquote top 6 or the big 6, as Manchester United are known, despite finishing low down the Premier League table last season. That maybe you do have to set up a little bit more defensively and try and hang in there for a little bit. And I think that 5 at the back formation, getting Dan Ballard in there, I think that's a real good option. We saw it against Villa at home, didn't we, when Sunderland went out to 10 men. I think that can be a real string to the bow, and I think Le Bris has shown tactical flexibility throughout his time at Sunderland, but I think we might have to see a little bit more of it going forward, particularly against those big boys or big games away from home.
Yeah, I mean, James has sort of alluded to it there, hasn't he, Phil? But are there positives to be taken from the fact that in terms of his in-game management, Régis was able to identify that things weren't working in the way that he wanted it to. He made that alteration, and from then on, Sunderland perhaps looked a little bit steadier in how they went about things.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of factors in that. I think one, you're absolutely right, and it would have been quite easy just to wait till half time, by which point the damage could have been even worse. That was definitely credit in the bank. I think you also have to we shouldn't get too carried away by Sunderland's improvement, because I think Man United managed the game thereafter, and I think that was a big part of why things went the way they did. So yeah, I think there's definitely some credit for Le Bris for acting decisively. I think the one thing that you couldn't really accuse him of in his time at Sunderland is leaving the team exposed defensively. Could you? Like, it's kind of been the opposite of that for the most part. So that leads me to think that maybe just the game played out in a different way to how Sunderland expected it to. Maybe Man United were a little bit more direct. Maybe they were a little bit more safety first in some aspects of the way they played, and that caught Sunderland off guard. So I don't think there's any need for kind of an overreaction or a panic. I think it's just maybe a little bit of a, take a deep breath and get back to basics a little bit. And I just felt like the chemistry of the team wasn't quite right. I think Masuaku and Odingra are really good players going forward. Maybe both of them against, Ahmad is a little bit much to ask. Do you know what I mean? I just felt, whether it's a back five or whether it would have been, moving another player over to left back, a more defensive-minded player, I think there were just a couple of errors made. And, as James said, it's really easy to say in hindsight, but I think it's one for someone to take a few lessons from and kind of quickly move on from, I think.
And in terms of key moments, James, obviously there was the penalty incident, a bit of a bizarre one. Stuart Atwell didn't award a penalty, then the linesman intervened and he did award a penalty, then VAR intervened and he didn't award a penalty. I mean, it certainly looked like a soft one. Do you think ultimately the officiating team came to the right decision?
Yeah, I think it's frustrating that it took them so long and it was, sort of miscommunicated. I think nobody was really sure what had happened, but to be brutally honest, if that's given against Sunderland as a penalty, I'm absolutely raging. There's no contact. Yes, his boot's high, but it's not dangerous. You would call that sort of a footballing incident, wouldn't you? When two players go for a ball, both players have to go for it. There's no contact. There's no studs near the head or anything like that. He's sort of side on Sesko, isn't he, to Hume? Hume goes down actually because the ball hits him in the face, not the boot. So for me, if that's given, I'm sort of really struggling with the rules in the Premier League generally. I don't see a world in which that needs to be given. As I say, the frustrating thing was that maybe it took a little bit of time to get there, but I'm aware that we can't keep criticising referees and processes for getting the right decision, even if it does take them a little bit of time, because that's what we all want at the end of the day, is consistency in the right decision. And I think they did come to the right decision in the end. Up the opposite end, of course, the Traore one, which I'm sure we'll come on to, that was baffling to me. And that key thing of consistency is really important, because I think we have seen penalties given for challenges like the one from Sesko on Hume, sort of over the months in the Premier League, over the years in the Premier League at times. So it probably does need sort of clarifying in a way. But yeah, I had no complaints with that one. Actually, my issue was up the other end.
Yeah, I mean, Phil, Bertrand Traore's got to feel a bit hard done by, hasn't he? Even if you don't necessarily believe it's a foul, there's certainly contact from Sene Lammens, isn't it? It doesn't seem like he's simulating in any form, is he?
Yeah, it's absolutely not a dive in any way, shape or form. It's a poor decision. What's the right level of punishment in terms of, is it a foul? Is it a goal scoring opportunity? I can't say confidently that I think it's either of those things, but it's definitely not a dive. And it feels a little bit like this is one where referees are in a little bit of a tangle at the moment, because I think we can clearly see there's been a push to act more on simulation this season, which in principle I think is great. And I think that's a really good thing that they should keep trying to do, because it has become a sort of blight on the game, really. But you are seeing some odd decisions that I think you wouldn't normally see. So I think that's one of them. If we're brutally honest, the Dominguez one at Nottingham Forest, I think, is also a decision that we're not used to seeing, and then that one ended up benefiting Sunderland. Although I think there was more of a case there that Dominguez was exaggerating contact than in this case. But yeah, I think that's one where at the moment it feels like the referees haven't quite landed on what the right level of what a dive is and when it's simulation, when it's not. So that was a really poor decision. But I have to say, I thought that Le Bris, he was asked about both those decisions in the post-match press conference, and he said, it's not a day for me to be talking about referees because I can't sit here and say that one decision could have changed the outcome of the game because we weren't where we needed to be, and Man United were the better team. And I have to say, I thought that was absolutely right. I think if Sunderland, I'd be concerned if Sunderland were coming away talking about referees because really, they didn't defend anywhere near as well as we've seen them do this season, and they started slowly. I'm reassured that I think both the staff and the players are coming away fully understanding that's the reason why they lost this game, even if I think they'll probably be quite rightly saying that, how on earth has he been booked for diving there?
And now, James, we head into the second international break of the season. Sunderland currently 9th in the table, 11 points from their opening run of games. I mean, you'd have bitten someone's hand off if they offered that to you at the beginning of the campaign, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been a really positive season for Sunderland. Obviously, they've ticked off a lot of boxes, haven't they? They're unbeaten at home. They won that first game against West Ham, which was really cathartic, really enjoyable. They've come from behind against Brentford. They've won away against Nottingham Forest. They've kept clean sheets. A point away at Palace is an excellent result, really. Especially, it was an excellent result at the time, but even in hindsight now, where they are in the table, having just beaten Liverpool last week, a good check against Aston Villa when they went down to 10 men, conceded first and still managed to get a draw, which I thought was absolutely exceptional. I don't really buy into this argument that Sunderland haven't played anybody yet. I think that's sort of cheap analysis. Yes, they haven't played sort of any of the traditional top six apart from Manchester United, but we know there's no easy games in the Premier League. I think there's an argument to say that the hardest part of Sunderland's season is still to come, obviously, with that sort of December, January run of fixtures and AFCON. I think that is absolutely fair enough to say. But to say that we haven't played anybody, I think is poor. I think Le Bris has done really well to manage that squad and to get everybody sort of off on the right foot with so many new additions. I think the cohesion they've shown actually has been remarkable, and hopefully that will continue to improve as the players get to know each other. But it's been superbly enjoyable. I mean, if you'd have told Sunderland fans they'd be 9th coming into the second international break of the season, with 11 points, having, arrived at that point unbeaten at home, they would have absolutely snapped your hand off as well. And obviously Newcastle are still below Sunderland as well at the second international break, and not many people would have predicted that at the start of the season. Of course, it can all change. I'm very wary of these stats about clubs having never been relegated after a certain amount of points at this stage of the season, because there's always a first, isn't there? It doesn't mean anything yet until the fat lady sings. There's still so much work to do, but there are positives. The January windows incoming. Obviously, Habib Diarra coming back from injury in December. This group of players have shown to me that I think they've got something. They can score goals. They can dig in, defensively sound. They're willing. They've got character. So I'm absolutely over the moon with the start of the season, to be honest. I think it's been really good. I mean, particularly that West Ham game as well. Like the sequence of that coming off the back of the playoff games against Coventry and then Sheffield United, a better sort of 4-game sequence I don't think you'll really find in Sunderland's history back to back. It was just magnificent. So long may the positivity continue.
I think for me, obviously none of us knew how the season was going to pan out going into it. There were some obvious trepidations, and I think justifiably so. One of the most impressive things is that I don't think there's been a game yet where Sunderland have truly looked out of the contest. Obviously, the 2 defeats so far, the Burnley game, I think if Eliza Mayenda scores first, could be a very different game. And I think there's an argument to be made for Sunderland having more control in that game than Burnley. See, Manchester United, disappointing result, but like you sort of alluded to, Régis makes the alterations and Sunderland do sort of steady themselves on their feet a little bit. And, I think for me, that's a huge testament to the recruitment, how far the squad's come. I think it's testament to Régis' coaching writ large. I mean, Phil, is there an argument to be made that it's not necessarily the results that are the most impressive thing, but the manner in which Sunderland have picked up these results. James has mentioned the Villa game coming from behind to rescue a point, the Brentford game where they had to leave it late to win it, and various other examples besides.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most promising things has been that spirit, if you like, that was there last season and that kind of got Sunderland results, even when at times I think everyone was pretty open and acknowledging they weren't playing sparkling football. That seems to have continued, and that's no mean feat when you bring in so many players and there's so much turnover in the squad. And obviously one of the things we discussed within the summer and the early weeks of the season was, the players from last season, he'll be pretty frustrated that they haven't had more minutes and have had players coming in and taking their place. So I think for there to be such an obvious, strong team spirit still and such a resilience, despite all that change, I think is mightily impressive. And, you can't have it both ways in terms of, we said before the season, this is a kind start, but Sunderland have to make the most of it. And that, ultimately we could be sitting here going into the second international break saying, well, hang on, we've only got a few points on the board. We're in the relegation zone. AFCON's coming up, 2 games against Man City in December's coming up, and we'd be panicking. So I said earlier in the season, it's all well and good saying it's a relatively easy fixture list, and that is absolutely true. But if you look at what the promoted teams did in the last 2 seasons, they were losing these games against the so-called weaker teams. The big change in the Premier League this season is the teams who were never really too troubled by relegation the last couple of years, Wolves, West Ham. Big part of that reason is because they were confidently and comfortably beating the relegated teams whenever they played them. So it's a massive step forward for Sunderland to already be in that bracket where, we're discussing whether it's, a bit of an easy game to play against Villa out of form. They were games that Villa were winning easily. So I think it's a huge credit to Sunderland. And I think there should be a lot of excitement and a lot of pride on your side, as long as there is that realism that there are going to be days like Saturday. There might be a few in a row in December. Do you know what I mean? I think it's perfectly plausible to kind of see both aspects of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's about getting those points on the board when you can, can't you? Because, it's a cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason. There are not really any easy games in the Premier League. You know what I mean? Like, I think especially this season, because it does feel as if the teams who have come up, Leeds and Burnley as well, they look as if they've got a little bit more bite and a little bit more battle about them. It's not necessarily something that we've seen in recent years, is it, James?
No, it's not. What I really love about Le Bris as well is that he's sort of a cold-hearted pragmatist, isn't he? In a sense that obviously Russell Martin's just been sacked from his job at Rangers, but going back to last season and his campaign with Southampton, he was very unwilling to compromise his ideals. We saw it a little bit with Vincent Kompany with Burnley a couple of seasons ago as well, although he did try and change a little bit towards the back end of the season. Le Bris just isn't like that. He's not built like that. He will do what he feels is the best without pretense. He's not bothered about style. It's all about the substance and about the results. And it served Sunderland well last season, and it's certainly served us well at the beginning of this season, because at the end of the day, style is one thing, but winning football games and getting results is another. And I know which one I prefer if I had the choice, to be honest.
Obviously, we mentioned the recruitment already. Really interested to get both your feelings on this. Like, have you got like a player of the season so far? Because there are so many candidates, aren't there? I think you could maybe even divide it into defensive and attacking, new signings and players who were on the books before. But I mean, Phil, I'll come to you first. Is there anybody in particular who's caught your eyes? It's such a glittering array that you're struggling to pick one out.
I mean, it has to be Xhaka for me. Obviously it's the fairly obvious one, but I think it's impossible to look past. You can talk about all the important stuff that he does off the pitch, the leadership that he's brought, the composure he's brought in possession. Even on Saturday when Sunderland went great, I thought Xhaka had a really good game. And then there's the fact that he's actually arguably being Sunderland's most impactful player in the final third in terms of the assists and the chances that he's created. And that combination is unbelievable, really. And I just think that's a sign that we're going to potentially, and I think there's a really good chance it could happen, that Sunderland stay up, and this is kind of the platform for them to stabilise in the Premier League potentially. I think we're going to be looking back at that as one of the most significant signings in the club's history, really, because I think it was just a bit of a game changer. Showed sort of the way it built on that feel-good factor that was already there with the fan base. It must have had an impact in some of the ambitious signings we made after that in terms of a little bit of a domino impact. I just think, for me, he's been the best player and the best signing. But of course, Roefs is an obvious one, Alderete, Siddiqui, there's loads. But I think sometimes you can look past the obvious one. I think if, there's one signing that you really wouldn't want of someone to have missed out on in that respect, I think it's the Xhaka one. I think it's been a game changer.
I mean, week on week, James, the more you see him play, the more it feels increasingly surreal that Granit Xhaka is at the Stadium of Light. Because, there's a version of this in which, we've seen it before. I mean, big name players, past 30, maybe coming towards the perceived end of their careers. They sort of come back to the Premier League, pick up one last paycheck and ride off in the sunset. But it certainly doesn't look as if Xhaka's up for that in the slightest, does it? He's here to make a difference.
Absolutely, and there were questions over his legs, how much he had left in the tank. But to me, I don't really see any visible signs of decline. And if there are physical signs of decline, then his mind is doing an exceptional job of getting him in the right position and hiding that. For me, I think he's been brilliant. As Phil said, it was a little bit of a signal to the footballing world that we were taking this really seriously. And the more I've thought about this as well, the more I just love Granit Xhaka's mentality around it. He's been at Arsenal for all of those years, captained the club in the Premier League. He's beaten Bayer Leverkusen, won a title there, had a fantastic couple of seasons, all of those international appearances for Switzerland. And his next move, as you say, isn't about a paycheck necessarily, although obviously we know the money had to be right to get him to Sunderland. It's about wanting to leave a bit of a legacy somewhere, understanding that he could be the figurehead that sort of drags this club, to Premier League safety or up the Premier League. And I feel it's really powerful that a player of his stature and caliber understands what Sunderland could be. It's nice that message is getting through, and he's delivering the goods on the pitch. And I think it's brilliant for the younger players as well. He's captained the club exceptionally well. Just thinking back to that West Ham game again, when he was telling everybody to calm down because he knows that things can happen in the Premier League. And despite being 2-0 up, Sunderland had to be careful, and they were. Thankfully, they got the third. But just his actions as well in the final third. He's got 3 assists this season, which has sort of got under the radar a little bit. But that the cross for the assist in the game earlier on in the season. Who scored it? Was it? I'm trying to think. He crossed the ball in earlier on in the season at home. My mind's gone blank.
Isidore, wasn't it?
Isidore, yeah. Sorry, yeah, that was right. The cross for that was just exceptional in a sense that a younger player would have maybe rushed that and tried to get the ball in the box quickly, but he just slowed everything down, concentrated on the delivery of the cross. And again against Aston Villa, when he slows everything down, he doesn't rush when he meets that headed ball. Granted, there weren't too many. Well, there were loads of Aston Villa players around him, but they didn't really do anything. But he just was calmness personified, and I think that's really valuable in a football team, and he brings a calmness and a presence. If we're talking about signings of the season, though, I've been so impressed with Robin Roefs. I've been just blown away by how good he is, his shot stop and his anticipation, just how good he is under a high ball. I can't believe he's only played one season of senior football. What is he, 22, 23? I think he's only going to get better and better. We've seen at other clubs, particularly Manchester United, how hard it can be to get a good goalkeeper. But the early signs from him are really, 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 really promising. I was a massive fan of Anthony Patterson, but I think he's, unfortunately for Pato, just a level above in everything that he's done. And I think the other signing for me would be Mukiele. I think it's just been fantastic. Alongside Alderete as well, you could throw him in there. But that sort of defensive sort of trio of Roefs, Mukiele and Alderete, I think is going to be really, really important. And I like Ronaldo as well. I know he's given away a penalty and got a red card, so he's sadly not in contention now. But I think when he comes back, that's going to be really, really important.
Yeah, it's interesting with Ronaldo, isn't it? I saw one of those, sort of like on Twitter, like an influencer doing their flop signings of the season, and they snuck Ronaldo in there, and I was like, tell me you haven't actually watched Sunderland this season without telling me you haven't actually watched Sunderland this season. So obviously, like you say, the penalty conceded, the red card are going to go against him, but he runs his own personal marathon every game, doesn't he? He's up and down that left flank absolutely relentlessly. I think speaking of relentless, for me, another one who I know you've mentioned him, Phil, but might fly under the radar a little bit, Noah Siddiqui. I think his ceiling of potential is just absolutely staggering. I think him coming into the team, what he's already offered and what he could go on to offer if he continues on this trajectory is just absolutely remarkable. I love the balance of that midfield three, and obviously we're going to be without Habib Diarra for a while to come with injuries and then potentially AFCON, and that's obviously going to be something that Régis has to contend with in terms of his selection, what he does, whether he leaves Enzo in there, whether he brings Chris Rigg back into the side or whatever it may be. But I think that when you've got Xhaka in there pulling the strings in the manner that he does, when you've got Siddiqui offering the legs that he does, and then obviously Diarra and his willingness to sort of break through the lines and drive with the ball, I think Sunderland have to be hugely lauded for bringing in that three, and I do think that they could really make a difference in the bid for survival. Obviously, we mentioned players of the season. Also interested to get your thoughts on moments of the season, because even though we're only a handful of games in, there's been quite a few memorable ones. I mean, I'll come to you first, James. Anything in particular that jumps out at you as being something that you're going to remember for a long, long time?
I think just the West Ham game generally was again so cathartic for reasons I've already described. I mean, Wilson Isidore and his exploits after just having a kid. I should mention actually that he's such a nice guy that he unprompted messaged me to congratulate me, which was very much appreciated actually. I didn't put it out there because I didn't think it was the right thing to do at the time, but just what a nice guy, and sort of embraced the club so well, and I think adapted to life in the Premier League better than I thought he would. Those 3 goals have been really important, and he's hit the ground running, which is really nice to see. But the equaliser against Aston Villa as well was a moment where I started to think, like, God, this team have actually really, really got something. They've got some stones. They've fought back from adversity in this game, and that could be really powerful, really important. I mean, you could talk about a lot of the season. Winning away at Nottingham Forest is a huge milestone in the season potentially. The grit and desire showed away at Crystal Palace to get a point there, having been under the cosh for a lot of it. You can point towards a lot of things this season. I think it's been, as I say, hugely enjoyable. But for me, that West Ham game, because you never know how an opening game of the season is going to go, do you? There's hope, there's expectation. You're cautious as well. Can Sunderland return to the Premier League with a bang, or will we just get humped and then that's a really hard season after that? But just to, after a goalless first half, to get those goals in the second half and go 2 and then 3-0 up at the end, it was just such a release. Having not had Premier League football at the Stadium of Light for going on a decade, I felt like it was really significant. The sun was shining. It was just a day of celebration. Phil wrote a really nice piece on it, actually, and what it meant to the city. And it does and did feel at the time like we were really on the up.
Nice as well that the 3 goal scorers were lads who were there during the promotion campaign as well. I thought it was a lovely little detail, really cathartic. Phil, I mean, I'll come to you, same question.
I think James has only left me with a Carabao Cup defeat at Huddersfield, but I feel like I can't.
Sorry,
When that bridge opens, that's going to be the highlight of my season so far. Come on, surely for the Wolves game. I think it has to be the opening day, the mood around the city, really. I think it was almost, it just felt like an extension to that. And we said it a few times, like over the course of the last few months, but that was a generational run of games from the start of the Coventry semi-final through to West Ham. And then next weekend at Burnley, it was like, this is what it's normally like. So yeah, I think it's absolutely, definitely the Aston Villa one. I think is a big point to kind of throw in terms of going from a situation where, as you rightly say, a player's actually done really well and Reynaldo a daft red card, and you think, well, that's this game over, to actually get something out of that was probably the result that most made me think, I actually think this team's got a really, really strong chance of survival. But everything about that opening day was just incredibly special.
Yeah, I think I'd sort of shout out the Brentford winner in a similar sort of, ilk to that, in the sense that I think coming off the back of the Burnley defeat, and then going out the cup against Huddersfield, which obviously isn't particularly significant, but I think if Sunderland then go and lose to Brentford, you start to go, oh, hang on, this could end up being a bit of a slog this season. Look, it might still end up being a bit of a slog, we never know. But I think the manner in which they were able to come back, and then obviously another stoppage time winner, this whole till the end thing that refuses to die, that lingers around the place. I think that was a moment for me where, similarly, like you're saying about the Villa game, I thought, okay, this team has got something here, and they've got the resolve and the quality to really make a go of this division. Obviously, looking ahead to post-international break, just quickly before we dash off. I mean, next game is Wolves. Obviously, they've had a very tricky start in their own right. That's got to be a game that Sunderland are really looking at, because from there, it's Everton, Chelsea, Arsenal, and those games that Sunderland have been accused of not having to play yet, the difficult teams, they're going to start coming thick and fast, aren't they?
It feels like an important game. I think probably the one thing I would say is that Wolves, one of those teams that at the start of the season, you were thinking, well, they've got good players, but if we are realistically going to stay up, they are a team that we're probably going to have to chase. And if you'd said coming into this game that we'd be, 9 points clear of them? Is that right? Yeah. I think that's the kind that we'd have all been absolutely ecstatic with that. So I think it's important to have that perspective going into the game. But you are right in that Sunderland can turn an excellent start of the season into an outstanding one with a win in that game. And we've been so good at home so far this season. It does feel like a massive opportunity. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting, because I've obviously talked at the start of the podcast about the fact that we were a little bit overly ambitious against Man United and we need to get back to basics. But, there will be an expectation for Sunderland to go and push on and win that game. So I'm really interested to see what Le Bris does with the team for that one and how Sunderland kind of go after it. Yeah, but it's important to keep perspective. It's a massive game, but we're well ahead of where we hoped we would be at this point, and that'll be the case regardless of what happens in the Wolves game.
Absolutely. Lovely stuff. Right, shall we wrap it up there then? That's all we've got time for this week's show. Join us again next week when we'll be discussing all of the latest Sunderland news and developments. In the meantime, follow all the latest Black Cats news on the Sunderland Echo, or you can give us a follow on social media as well. Thanks to James. Thanks to Phil. Thanks to you for listening, and we'll see you next time.